Okay, and we are live.
All right. تفضلوا سيدي هارون. Want to say a few words before we start?
Okay, sure. Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. First of all, welcome to everyone. Alhamdulillah, it's wonderful to have everyone here. Jazakumullah khairan. Thanks, many thanks to Sheikh Talal for teaching us, and many thanks and jazaks to everyone who's been assisting behind the scenes on this. We appreciate everyone's patience as we've been getting our sort of the back-end system together. But inshallah, everybody should have received a copy of the syllabus, a copy of the text, and access to the Sira page. There was some confusion over when the review sessions will start. Inshallah, we will start review sessions this Tuesday, and I believe we'll use this same link, or perhaps well, actually, I think I'll have to set up a separate link. So we'll send out a separate link for review sessions. I think that's it for now. If anyone has any questions about any of the logistics, or perhaps also scheduling the second review session, if there's anyone who can't make the Tuesday times, people can reach out to me via email. And with that, I think that's all we have to cover. So I will pass it to Sheikh Talal. Oh, and actually, sorry, one last thing. For everybody on Zoom, please do turn on your cameras and get involved in the discussions. We will also be checking the chat frequently, and for whatever reason, if there's some questions in the chat that didn't get brought up here in the Zoom session, we will do our best to. Somebody will. Let's see who's here with it. Well, either CD Marwan or I think CD Justin will raise those questions here, and also for those watching on YouTube Live, we'll keep an eye on the chats as well. And so if there's any questions you would like us to raise with the Sheikh in the session here today, we'll do our best to do so. And we'll also just sort of keep track of all the questions if we don't get to every question in both the Zoom and the YouTube chats. So we can hopefully come back to them in review sessions and emails and next week. So Jazakallah khair, and now I'll officially pass the mic to Sheikh Talal.
طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to this second session of General Ontology. So again, this course is an intro to Kalam Metaphysics. So we unfortunately, we will not be discussing any issues regarding to aqaid, or regarding to epistemology, or regarding to any other area in Kalam theology beside metaphysics, just to keep the discussion focused. And it's Kalam Metaphysics, as we mentioned before, not any other metaphysics. And it's an intro. It's not an advanced course, nor an intermediate course, just to get an exposure over the basic issues. As for the outline for today, Sidi Harun has taken care of the housekeeping, and we'll do a brief recap of session 1. We'll talk a little bit about the knowable, or the ma'loom, or the object of knowledge, and we'll ask 2 basic questions. Is existence self-evident? And can existence be defined? Those are the 2 main topics of today, and we'll end with highlights. So last session, we went over the structure, we conducted a short activity, and thank you all for answering the questions. Maybe we'll go over some of them after a few weeks. We went over an overview of general ontology or Umur aammah, and we mentioned that these Umur aammah are nothing but the a'rad. They're the accidents that get attached to the mawjood bima huwa mawjood, to existence, quasi-existence, prior to being qualified, i.e. without any qualification. And then we went over some ontological premises that we borrowed from epistemology and ontology. And those are the premises that we will be starting from, that we have four waqi'iyas, we have four realism. So we have ontological realism, we have epistemic realism, we have semantic realism, the four realism that we've gone over. Dr. Nail took, we thank Dr. Nail for taking the time to verify that there was a fatha on the noon, at least in the Sultaniya edition of Bukhari. So last session, we went over the table of contents of any major books on Kalam, and we mentioned that they usually include 6 main sections. We're focusing on the general ontology section, which has 5 main chapters: existence and non-existence, quiddity and its property, necessity and contingency, unity and multiplicity, and cause and effect. And prior to talking about these 5 chapters, usually the scholars talk about the objects of knowledge, al-ma'lum, or the knowable. So just for fun, maybe we can start with one activity. Nazariyatul Ma'rifa, because we're assuming that we know epistemology. Nazariyatul Ma'rifa, what do you think the subject matter of Nazariyatul Ma'rifa? ما موضوعها? What does it deal with? Any thoughts? We won't be discussing it. We just want to have a few thoughts on the issue.
The nature of knowledge.
Yes, تفضل.
The nature of knowledge.
The nature of knowledge, okay.
The knowability of knowledge. The knowability.
All right. In every science, we always ask من أي حيثية. So we study, the Arabic words من حيث الإعراب والبناء, or من حيث كذا. We study أدلة من حيث الوصول إلى الأحكام. هنا we study, as you mentioned, we study knowledge or the nature of knowledge, but from what perspective and toward what end? Any idea?
العلم من حيث طرق معرفته.
من حيث طرق معرفته. Okay, good. Any addition?
Just folks on the chat, if you don't mind hopping on the mic and stating them.
Yeah, just one or two. One or two more.
ممكن ودرجة معرفته, like the paths of knowledge and the extent to which something is knowable.
All right. How is it different from mantiq then? Because mantiq also deals with معلومات تصورية and تصديقية.
In Kalam, we deal with معلومات so far as they lead to the عقائد الدينية.
Epistemology. Marwan, do you mean epistemology in Kalam has a different subject matter than epistemology?
No, I meant the study of the ma'lum in general in kalam.
أيوة. Like, what is the subject matter of epistemology if it were to be taken as a separate subject, as its own independent science? What would be its subject matter? And من أي حيثية? Think about it because we may refer to it from time to time. Okay, let's move on. So last session we went over the definition of Umur aammah, that they are the أعراض that تلحق الموجودات بأسرها من دون تقييد, prior to qualification. And C.D. Justin gave a short summary of what we covered. Okay. Before we proceed, I'd like to give like a word on the delivery approach, the approach we're going to follow in delivering these sessions. Whenever we teach, whenever we speak with people, whenever we discuss, we tend to use a lot of metaphors. So one of the approach that we will be using is we're going to use a lot of metaphors. And metaphors are great to illustrate points, to make things clearer. It's like in the Quran, for example, in Surah Al-Anbiya, chapter 21, verse 18, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about truth and falsehood and used the metaphor as if falsehood and truth are in battle. They're fighting each other. Two entities, as the Quran identified them and says, rather we held truth against falsehood, and it dashes its brains, and lo, it gaps its last in desperate toil. It's like falsehood has its own entity, and truth came and expelled it and kicked it out of its land. And falsehood had no other option but to flee away. We're going to use this metaphor with wujud and adam, existence and non-existence, as if non-existence has its own entity. In reality, non-existence is non-existence. Non-existence doesn't even exist. But in our mind, we talked about it and we get carried away. We forget that non-existence is actually non-existence, and we start thinking of it as something that exists, something that has an entity. And we speak about it as something that has entity. In fact, non-existence is nothing but raf'ul wujud. When I say an-naqidani la yajtami'an, the principle of non-contradiction, and I say al-wujud, existence and non-existence cannot exist at the same time, this is a metaphor, because I only have existence in front of me. And then I imagine that there is something called non-existence. And then I issue a statement that existence and non-existence cannot exist in this thing. But in fact, what I see in front of me, I see Sidi Harun. That's all I see. I see his existence. And then I imagine, I pretend that Sidi Harun is gone. He's gone, and he's no longer there. I pretend and I imagine his adam, his non-existence. Then I say existence and non-existence cannot exist at the same time. So knowingly or unknowingly, we use a lot of metaphors when we speak about even the most complicated subjects. And this is something we're going to use here as well. And I'm confident that many of you use it as well. But just to make it clear. So let's begin with the ma'lum. The ma'lum, why begin with the ma'lum? Why begin with existence, and before existence, begin with the knowable? When you go to IKEA and buy a dresser, they give you all the parts. These parts are the building blocks. Without these building blocks, you cannot assemble the dresser. In any science, we always start with the building blocks. And ulama usually like to start with the smallest building blocks. In usul, we start with the smallest building block. In language, in Arabic language, in grammar, we start with the smallest building block. We have words. Words are composed of letters. Letters are linguistic sounds. We begin with sound. Sound is the smallest epistemic unit, is the smallest ma'rifi unit, is the smallest building block. Once we identify all the smallest building blocks, and there is no more building blocks, those are the simple building blocks, we start building from there. We don't begin our journey in the middle, because then our journey is cut off from its origin. We begin our journey from the starting point. So where to begin? We start with the smallest building block, i.e. start with the ma'lum, and then the mawjud. And the ma'lum is related to ilm, and ilm is part of epistemology. And ma'lum is also the subject matter of theology. So I'm going to present here 4 approaches for the various schools. So most kalam theologians, they divide al-ma'lum into EM existent and non-existent. For many kalam theologians prior to Imam Ghazali, the existence only, by existent, they only mean the extra-mental existent. They did not acknowledge something called mental existence. And they had other ways to deal with it. As for the philosophers divided the ma'lum. This is a retroactive division because they start with the mawjud. They don't start with the ma'lum like the theologians. The philosophers, if we were to imagine a chart for them, it would be like this. Al-ma'lum, the knowable, can be either existent or non-existent. And the existent can either be mental or extra-mental. And the extra-mental is either necessary in itself or possible in itself. And the possible in itself is either a substance or a jawhar or arad. As for our friends, the Mu'tazilis, most Mu'tazili theologians, let me switch to my iPad. Most Mu'tazili theologians in Mu'tazili kalam, in Mu'tazili based kalam theology, they introduced 2 new concepts, something called as-sabit and something called al-hal. So as-sabit means that which is subsistent, as-sabit. So al-ma'lum, we're going to approach the ma'lum from 2 angles. We're going to approach it from right to left and left to right. At the end, we want to get here. We want to get to al-mawjud, al-mumkin, and al-mumtani'. Al-mawjud is existent, al-mumkin is the possible, and al-mumtani' is the impossible. So if we start from right to left, this way, al-ma'lum for the Mu'tazili is either manfi, completely denied, which is the impossible, the mumtani', or is sabit, is subsistent. and subsistent is prior to existence. Then الثابت is divided into can be موجود or can be ممكن. So the ممكن, even prior to its own existence, can be ثابت, can subsist. Not experimentally. That creates problems. That creates problems, especially when we get to the issue, to the topic regarding Allah's power. This is denying part of the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the ulama will be conversing with the Mu'tazila on this issue. Now, if we start from left to right, al-ma'lum can either be mawjud or ma'dum, can either be existent or non-existent. And the non-existent can either be mumkin or mumtana'. Mumkin, i.e. the possible prior to its existence. And al-mumtana' is the impossible, which will never exist. So you can see that for the Mu'tazili, for this group, that the ma'dum, the non-existence, can be thabit if it is a mumkin, if it is possible. That creates a lot of problems in theology, and that's why it was rejected by 99.99% of scholars. From Sunni, from Shi'i, from philosophers, especially the peripatetic tradition, and other groups as well. A group of the Mu'tazila, this is most Mu'tazili. Some Mu'tazili theologians, like 4 or 5 of them, introduced a new concept called al-hal. Al-hal is a state in between, but not for the things, it's for the attribute of the things. Sifatun li mawjudin. They define hal as sifatun li mawjudin. It's a quality of an existent. So it's not an entity, it's an attribute, it's a quality, it's an accident. So if we start from right to left, we have al-ma'lum can be divided into al-thabit, the subsistent, al-manfi, the denied. Al-thabit now can be either mawjud or in a state, because the thabit can be either a substance or an accident. And the accident can be in a state called the hal. It's a state in between wujud and adam, in between existence and non-existence. So this group of Mu'tazili, they don't say that X goes into a state. They say the quality of X can be in a state of existence or non-existence. If we go from left to right, we ask the question is, does the object of knowledge has تحقق بوجه ما? Is it realized in some sense, somehow? And then we divide it into al-kain and not kain. Al-kain fil a'yan, so being experimentally entified. And not kain, it's not experimentally entified. The not experimentally entified can either be mumkin, possible, or impossible. As for the kain, the experimentally entified, can either be mawjud or hal, i.e., if it is experimentally entified independently, i.e. بالاستقلال independently, then this is موجود and includes both ذوات and صفات, includes both the جواهر and أعراض, includes both substances as well as the أعراض, the things and their attributes. However, if it is كائن extramentally entified but not independently, i.e. بالتبع, by way of corollary or by way of concomitantly, then we call it al-hal. And this hal is the attribute or the arad that gets attached to the substance. We can also make three more charts to reflect what most Kalam theologians post-Ghazali adopted. So this, actually, by beginning with the ma'lum, we are starting from the basic foundation, the knowable. Anything that has the possibility of being known. That's the most basic block, basic building block. And we start building from there. CD Justin, you want to summarize? Give us a recap?
Inshallah. So what we've spoken about so far is that we begin from the most basic building block for our Kalam studies, and that is the ma'lum. So that's where we begin from. And then from the ma'lum, we move on to the mawjud. So what we've seen so far is that there are different ways in which the ma'lum has been conceptualized to get to from the ma'lum to the mawjud. So we first looked at the way that the theologians divide the ma'lum into the non-existent and then the extramentally existent. And then the extramentally existent would divide then further. However, the theologians before Imam Ghazali, rahimahullah, didn't consider mental existence. Now, with the philosophers, they would divide the ma'lum into the noble into existence and non-existence. And we saw the chart and how that would then lead into the wajib, and then the mumkin, and the mumkin would further divide. And then we saw that the Mu'tazila, there were two ways that we can conceptualize there, or we can understand the way that they divide the ma'lum. So the first would be the Mu'tazila, the majority of them divide the ma'lum into the mawjud and the ma'dum. And then so the existent and then the non-existent. And then from the, they would take the ma'dum, the non-existent, and they would divide that into the mumkin, the contingent or the possible, and the mumtana, the impossible. And then we can look at the from another side, which is the ma'lum, again, the noble, and we can look at it from the idea of thabit and manfi, so something that subsists and that does not subsist. And then finally, we can see that the thabit, the subsistent, will map onto the mawjud, whereas the manfi would map onto the ma'dum. And then also the thabit would map onto the ma'dum mumkin as well. And then we also saw that some of the Mu'tazila, some of the Mu'tazila theologians, they introduced the concept of the hal, and the hal is a sifa for the mawjud, but it's not independent. So whereas the mawjud is an extramentally existing entity that is independent, whereas the hal is not.
Jazakumullahu khairan. So let's switch back. So you can see that why the ulama starts with the ma'lum, with the knowable. That's the most basic building block. As you know, in philosophy, the subject matter of philosophy is existence coexistence. الموجود بما هو موجود قبل التقييد, prior to, without qualification. However, the Kalam theologians expanded the subject matter of theology beyond existence. And they expanded it to include the ma'lum, the knowable, from the perspective of establishing or supporting religious beliefs. So the subject matter of Kalam theology ended up being slightly wider and broader than the subject matter of philosophy. It's a nice way to start the subject matter of Kalam, or the study of Kalam. Let's move on to existence now.
Excuse me, Sheikh.
Now,
Sorry, there's a couple of interesting questions in the chat, and we're just wondering, should we bring them to your attention now, or
if they're related and you know, we can answer them today, let's do that. Let's do it. And if they're related to a future subject, then I'll mention that we'll answer them later, inshallah. And if I don't know the answer, then maybe you can discuss them in the you know, in the application session. Yes, go ahead.
okay, this one is just about the difference between hal and sifa. Is so the question goes, so how is the hal different from a sifa?
They're similar in some ways and different in other ways. Well, sifa already exists. The hal hasn't reached the level of existence yet. It's still trying to exist. It's prior to existence. The sifa exists in something else. The hal wants to exist in something else, but it's still hanging somewhere, waiting for somebody to push it up, to get attached to a substance so that it can exist in that substance, or in that thing, or in that entity. Does that answer the question?
I invite Sidi Sharif and Sister Claire to.
Well, so are you saying, Sheikh, that the entity that does not yet exist is thabit for the Mu'tazila, but not mawjood, while its not yet existent qualities are hals, but not sifat? Is that correct? I mean, the hal is basically.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's not yet sifat.
Okay. So
And notice
non-existent.
that the thabit applies to entities, applies to al-ma'dum al-mumkin.
Mhm.
So not to the attribute, because the ma'dum hasn't existed yet for an attribute to exist with it. While
Okay.
al-hal applies to the attribute after the thing existed. Will it have this attribute or not? So in the thought of some Mu'tazili, they thought that there could be some attributes that have not reached the level of sifa yet. That becomes problematic because they considered existence to be a hal. And as Taftazani, we will see in Tahzib al-Kalam, he says, وَجَعَلُوا الْوُجُودَ مِنْهُ. They classified existence as a hal, as a state which neither exists and neither not exist. And that will lead to an interesting discussion. As soon as you make existence as a hal, the whole argument collapses. Their argument collapses. But that's a further discussion, inshallah.
Jazakumullahu khairan.
وإياكم. Usually, to say a word about the hal, one may be tempted to think that let's get this discussion out of the books of Kalam and put it in the history of Kalam. And I can see the justification for that with some groups. But in Ahl Sunnah Kalam theology, this discussion reflects also a way of thinking. And also it reflects a discussion that will come later when we discuss Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his attributes. So they bring that discussion again when talking about the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the ulama kept it in, as a main topic in the books of Kalam, because it not only, I mean, in essence, if you were to remove it, the discussion will still flow smoothly. But it adds value to the way of thinking some groups went through, and it gives us an indication of the way of thinking that we should avoid, because it will lead to either infinite regress or some absurd, untenable positions. Yes, was there another question, Sidi Harun?
There's let's see, a few more. Let's see. Yeah, so one question is, my understanding from the text is that that the quote, some Mu'tazila opinion is that al-mumkin al-ma'dum is also under the category of a thabit. Question is whether that's correct or not.
Al-mumkin al-ma'dum is under the category of a thabit. Yeah. Is that the question?
So it says, my understanding is from the text is that some Mu'tazila opinion is that al-mumkin al-ma'dum is also under the category of a thabit. So
that's correct. Yeah, in principle, that's correct. Yeah.
And then another question.
What they refer to as shay'iyatul ma'dum. Yeah. أي المعدوم الممكن الذي سيوجد. Not المعدوم الممكن الذي لن يوجد. Yeah, keep going.
Oh, sorry.
I think let's move on, and then
Okay.
We'll see if we can address those questions after. If we are able to finish what we want to finish today, then maybe we'll entertain a few questions. And also, I would like to have a discussion on these issues with the at least few people who are present among the Zoom community.
Should we hold off on questions until after?
Yeah, after each point, if you can mention one or two, if they're relevant, then we'll address them.
Okay.
And if they won't take time, we'll address them. Otherwise, we'll maybe we can postpone them until later. Okay. So let's begin now with existence. So before reading the textbook, Tahzib al-Kalam, let's begin with a few introductory remarks. There was a question whether we have three basic questions. Number one, can existence be defined? Number two, is it a well-known concept? Is it an a priori concept? Number three, is it the most a priori of all concepts? According to the peripatetic philosophers, can existence be defined? No, it cannot be defined. Is it an a priori concept? Yes, it is the basic a priori concept. It's the basic building block. Is it the most a priori of all concepts? Yes, it is. It is the most basic building block. Nothing before it. And Imam Razi agreed with all of these. Can existence be defined? No. Is it an a priori concept? Yes. Is it the most a priori of all concepts? Yes. If you read Mawaqif, you will see that this doesn't sit well with E.G. Because in principle, he also agrees with Razi and Ibn Sina and all other scholars. But E.G. thinks that there's a subtle point that needs to be clarified. And needs to be refined. A subtle point that is assumed that needs to be made explicit to avoid all confusion. So if you read Mawaqif, you may notice this. As with anything, there will always be people who will deny what you say. So if we have 99.99% of people saying existence is self-evident, we will always find someone who will say it's not self-evident. It's like in the old days, we have the sophists who will deny things. And if it's not self-evident, then it can be acquired. Or a very extreme minority says it's not even cognizable. So the question, is existence self-evident? For most people, it is self-evident. Some will try to deny it. For our purpose, we will not focus on those that deny existence is self-evident. We want to try to understand one position first. We want to understand it well, and after understanding this position well, we can compare it to other positions, and the comparison will be meaningful. But for the sake of time and for the sake of the scope of discourse, we will not discuss the other position. If you want to read about it, we can read Mawaqif or Maqasid or Tajreed by Tusi, he alludes to it. But Mawaqif discusses it the most. Mawaqif is like a doxography of ideas and positions by various groups. Let's move on. So we will only limit ourselves to this statement. Existence is self-evident. In our text, as we presented last time, we presented the text Tahdhib al-Kalam on the left by Taftazani in green, and Jawahir al-Kalam on the right by E.G. in red. And today we would like to focus on 2 points. The first point is al-wujudu badihiyun. Existence is self-evident. Taftazani says تصور الوجود ضروري or بديهي. Today, instead of focusing on Taftazani, we will focus on E.G. And the reason is E.G. provided what he called واستدل بأنه جزء وجودي. That some people advanced an argument that wujud is a part of wujudi. Wujud is a part of wujudi, my existence. And my existence is self-evident. And my is self-evident. Therefore, wujud is also self-evident. If existence is self-evident, it doesn't need a proof. Imam Razi provided 3 proofs. At the basic level, since we are at the layer of building blocks, all the proofs are what we call tanbihat. They're not real proofs. They're just tanbihat. They're just drawing our attention to the truth of this fact, of this statement. The second point is about its definition. And in definition, we will focus on what Taftazani says, what ta'rifu lafziyun. To define existence is just a lafzi ta'rif. It's just exchanging word for another. It's not real ta'rif. But the way Taftazani worded it actually takes care of the concern of E.G. and made what is implicit, a little less implicit, as we will see. So let's begin with this. Al-wujudu badihiyun. Existence is self-evident. Again, for this point, we will not be reading Taftazani, and we will not be reading the commentary of Sanandaji on Taftazani. because the commentary of Sanandaji on Taftazani attempted to use this a different argument, which is a bit more involved. So we'll focus on EG, and we'll only focus on the matan, on the text, not on any commentary. Now we're in a dilemma. When we read this word, al-wujudu badihiyun, existence is self-evident, you may find yourself in a dilemma, like, why are we starting with this? What's going on? Why is this statement thrown in our face? Why do the books of Kalam begin with this statement? Or the books of theology begin with this statement? Or the books of philosophy begin with this statement? Why not begin with something else? Why begin with al-wujudu badihiyun? Why begin with existence is self-evident? Then we realize that actually we missed the conversation. And we are joining a conversation. And this conversation has been going on for hundreds of years. But we came at the end. And we are reading their conclusion. And their conclusion is al-wujudu badihiyun. Existence is self-evident. We weren't a part of the conversation. If you were to read Sharh al-Aqaid, it's a conversation that has been going on for 600, 700 years. If you read Mawaqif or Maqasid, it's a conversation that has been going on for 800 years. And if we just join the conversation for 5-10 minutes, we may not understand anything. If we spend an hour in their company, we may start understanding a few things, few words. And the more time we spend with these books, and the more times we join their conversation, we begin to notice things. We begin to become familiar with the issues and topics they discuss, to the point, perhaps even, that we can participate in the conversation ourselves. At this point, we're coming at the end of the conversation. We want to get acquainted with the conversation, with the issues, with the topics. And why are we starting with al-wujud? And then what does it mean? When I hear this, al-wujudu badihiyun, existence is self-evident. Well, what does that mean? Is it تصوره بديهيا? الوجود تصوره بديهيا? Conceptualizing wujud is بديهي? Or is it إدراكه بديهيا? الوجود إدراكه بديهيا؟ أي إدراك الوجود بديهيا? So the apprehension of wujud is بديهي? Perceiving wujud is بديهي? Ascertaining wujud is بديهي? What do we mean by الوجود بديهي? Or do we mean مفهومه بديهيا? الوجود مفهوم بالبداهة. What do we mean? What do they mean by الوجود بديهيا? Or do they mean الوجود معلوم بالبداهة? This simple statement, الوجود بديهيا, what does it mean? Or does it mean الحكم عليه بديهيا? So the judgment is بديهي? Or الوجود بكنهه وحقيقته بديهيا؟ الوجود in the very reality of wujud is بديهي? What is it that we mean? And then the last question, there could be more, And ما منشأ البداهة, this badaha, where did it come from? This self-evidence, we say the self-evidence nature of existence. This self-evidence, where did it come from? Is it derived from something? Does it have an origin somewhere? Is it from repetition? Because 8 times 8 is badihi for me, is self-evident for me, 64. But for someone who's starting math, it's not self-evident. But through repetition and solving exercises, it gets to a point that 8 by 8 is badihi, is self-evident. 11 by 11 is 121, self-evident. 12 by 12 is 144, self-evident. For someone who's been practicing math for a long time. So something through repetition can become badihi. So is this it? Is this why it's badihi? What does it mean to be badihi? Does that make sense? Even if we're to pick one of them, let's pick one of them, and I pick mafhum. Let's say al-wujudu mafhumuhu badihiyun, i.e., let's say mafhum al-wujudi badihiyun. What does that mean? Mafhum means the concept or notion of wujud is badihi. What does that mean? Does it mean that مفهوم الوجود معلوم بالبداهة؟ or مفهوم الوجود مشير إلى البداهة, is pointing toward badaha? This notion of wujud in our mind, is it pointing to badaha, or does it mean معلوم بالبداهة? And on a tangent point, can I describe a notion with the attribute of being badihi? Can I say mafhum is badihi? Or not badihi? Can one say that? المفهوم ما يفهم من الشيء، ما يفهم من الخارج. So these extramental realities that are outside our mind, when they come to our mind, they become mafahim. They become notions, they become concepts. And these concepts, they have a reference. They point to something beyond themselves. That something beyond themselves is the badihi, not the mafhum. Mafhum, poor mafhum, cannot be badihi or not badihi. Is what I understood from something. That's it. That's what mafhum is what one understands from something else. Now, tasamuhan, metaphorically, we say al-mafhumu badihiyun. That's a metaphor. It's not in reality. And that's something we'll discuss maybe at a later time. Let me put myself again on the screen. Instead of the iPad. All right. So if you haven't realized this yet, it's now time to clean our thoughts. And Sheikh Bouti used to say, Kalam is the best vacuum cleaner you can have. Because as we live our life, we collect dust, in our apartments and our houses. We always collect dust. And we need to dust away all this dust and clean the apartment. Same thing in our thoughts and our minds. We collect a lot of dusts. We need a vacuum cleaner to throw everything away and start rebuilding from the basic building blocks and asking questions that we've never asked before. we've been bombarded with this statement al-wujudu badihiyun to the point that our mind became numb, and we stopped asking questions. But if we were to study metaphysics again, we will have to ask the most basic questions, because we want things to be clear so that when we build, because any mistake we do at this point may get to a huge mistake later on. So if we were to discuss this to death, or like not us, but the ulama, if they were to discuss this to death, that's not a bad idea. Like they do in usul, like they do in anything else. And to someone who is just starting to open the books, we may wonder, like, why are they discussing this issue? It seems so obvious to me. Yeah, it's obvious to you, but we have to make sure that no dust can creep in. And this will avoid, this has benefit in the sense that if we know all these questions, when we think about issues in our mind, or when we communicate with others regarding issues, we're able to distinguish and differentiate between these subtle ma'ani, these subtle meanings. So let's go back to E.G. E.G. says, al-wujudu badihiyun. Why did we ask these questions? Why did we say that? What does it mean for wujud to be badihi? Because the way our mind works is that when we see two words beside each other, we ask why. Unless we see the word repeated twice. If I say al-insanu insanun, if I say something is itself, man is man, wujud is wujud, the mind doesn't ask any questions. He continues on, remaining asleep. He's happy. The mind is happy. Something is itself, yeah, there is no problem with that. This is the identity principle. But as soon as we put two words together, the mind will say, why? Why are you putting these two together? There must be a reason why you were able to put these two words together. So there has to be some mujanasa, some suitability, some appropriateness. If I say al-insanu hajarun, man is a rock, the mind will scream. There is no mujanasa. There is nothing suitable between man and a rock to say man is a rock. But if I were to say man is alim, man is a scholar, Zaydun is an amazing alim, the mind will say, yeah, it's possible, but why? Why is he alim? Oh, because he wrote a book. Oh, because he gave an amazing speech. Oh, because he wrote this article. Ah, okay, that's a sufficient reason for me to accept that you can put these two words together. Anytime we put two words together, the mind will scream, why? Why are you putting these two together? Unless the word is repeated twice. And that's also a metaphor. When I say al-insanu insanun, that's a metaphor. Because we don't have two entities called insan, and we're saying the insan is identical, this entity is identical to that. Is bil-iddi'a. I'm pretending that there is another insan, and I'm saying the first insan is the same as the second insan. هذا تساهلا تسامحا. We've relaxed a little bit, and it's beneficial for the principle of identity. Something is itself, but in reality, outside my mind, we don't have two things. We only have insan. We only have Zayd. If I say Zayd is Zayd, we only have Zayd. I don't have two Zayds, and the first Zayd is the same as the second Zayd. Because as soon as you put two words together, you're implying ghayriyya. You're implying that they're not the same. We're implying that we have two things, not one thing. And you can only do that as part of the logical reality, not as part of the ontological reality. That's also another thing to remember. Never ever confuse the logical reality with the ontological reality. If you start thinking that, you know, what's happening in my mind is actually real, that's when you may start to make mistakes. We need always to double check the conclusions we reach in our mind with what is really going on, what is really happening, before we say that this corresponds to something that really exists. So let's go back now to EG. EG says, الوجود بديهي. And then he gave us a pseudo proof. واستدل بأنه جزء وجودي وهو بديهي. At the basic level, all these proofs are nothing but تنبيهات. There's something that's obvious. It could be self-evident, but maybe for me, I haven't seen it yet. But as soon as you explain what the first word means, what the second word means, I say, yeah, sure, I agree. So that's not a proof, it's actually a pseudo-proof or tanbihun, just you're reminding me, it's by way of admonition. Now, Imam Razi, since he tries to explore all possibilities, he says al-wujudu badihiyya, but I'm going to assume it's not badihi. I'm not going to even assume that it is badihi. And remember, he is now in the logical reality. He's not in the ontological reality. Because we're going to start from the ontological reality and see how the logical reality can be, can make sense. Because all these things don't have any meaning on the ontological reality. Imam Razi says, we're going to provide, he provided 3 tanbihat, or 3 arguments for badahatul wujud, for the self-evidence nature of wujud. The first argument, and this is in his books, Al-Mabahith al-Mashriqiyya and in Mulakhas. The first argument, Juz'u wujudi, wujud is part of my existence, and therefore is badihi because my existence is badihi. i.e., existence in the unconditional sense is embedded or encapsulated in the notion of my existence. My existence is a specific existence, it's my existence. And وجود الأخص يستلزم وجود العام. Therefore, existence in the unconditional sense became qualified with my existence. My existence is a conditional existence and is conceptually self-evident. Do I doubt my existence? Number 2, الشيء إما موجود وإما معدوم. So this is a statement, this is a proposition. And by الشيء here doesn't mean the extramental reality, it means al-ma'lum. Al-amru, al-ma'lumu, i.e. the knowable, is either existent, i.e. a being, or non-existent, i.e. a non-being. Is a self-evident proposition, is a self-evident assent. تصديق بديهي. Therefore, wujud and adam are also badihi. That's the essence of the argument. The third argument is by way of contradiction. Let's assume it's not badihi. Let's assume it is muktasab, it is acquired. And if wujud were not to be badihi, but acquired, it would then have been acquired by way of either a definition, i.e. had a real definition, or a rasm, a descriptive definition. وكلاهما باطلان والقسمان باطلان. قال لو كان مكتسبا فإما بالحد وإما بالرسم والقسمان باطلان. So all these two are untenable. Now the third argument, it appears that no one ever have claimed that. So this is a hypothetical possibility that Imam Razi brought into the discussion. It's like a mental fiction. احتمال عقلي فقط. And we can talk more about this, but we want to focus on جزء وجودي. Sanandaji, in his commentary on تهذيب الكلام, brought the second argument of Razi, الشيء إما موجود وإما معدوم بديهيا. Tusi Nasiruddin, in his Tajreed, he discussed the second argument of Razi and the third argument and raised some objection to them, but kept silent about the first argument, which Imam Iji used, which is the one we're going to look at. And then Tusi used that argument in some of his books later on, especially in Al-Fusul al-Nasiriyya. So this first argument is a tanbih, but let's explore this argument a little bit. Am I going fast, Sidi Harun? Are we going at the right speed? Okay.
All good, all good.
Let's go back to Iji. Iji says, Al-wujudu badihiyun. Existence is self-evident. وَاسْتُدِلَّ بِأَنَّهُ جُزْءُ وُجُودِي. Imam Iji saying, وَاسْتُدِلَّ, like this is not my istidlal. You know, I agree with it, but not totally. It needs to be refined. Something implicit needs to be made more explicit. Let's forget about all these nuances and let's try to understand what Iji is saying. Okay. Now let's assume that al-wujudu badihiyun is a conclusion. And let's assume we want to conduct a thought experiment and try to imagine what kind of syllogism one have to go through to reach this conclusion. If al-wujudu badihiyun is a conclusion and it can be derived from syllogism, from qiyas, how many syllogism do I need to get at this conclusion? Do I need one? Do I need two? Do I need three? How many do I need? We need two. I gave you the answer. We need two. So let's try to do reverse engineering and try to figure out what the first syllogism, where do we need to start from? And we reach conclusion number one. And then conclusion number one, we'll use it as a premise in the second syllogism. And we reach conclusion number two, which will lead us to al-wujudu badihiyya. Any thoughts? Anyone would like to give it a try?
The mawdu' has to be the wujud in the
5
beginning.
seconds. 5 seconds. تفضلوا نعم سيدي.
I said I guess if we're organizing it with the mawdu', if we're thinking the mawdu' of the natija has to be wujud, so that which we at least we would start with.
All right. Okay. Mhm. Remember that the first syllogism will not give us the conclusion, al-wujudu badihiyun. It's the second syllogism that will lead us to al-wujudu badihiyun. So in the first syllogism, what are we going to start from? Five seconds. Just give it some thought and then we'll mention them. Let's look at the first syllogism. We're going to say نحن ندرك أشياء وكل من أدرك شيئا أدرك وجوده إدراكا ضروريا. The conclusion نحن ندرك وجود الأشياء إدراكا ضروريا بديهيا. ضروري and بديهي are synonyms here. That's the first conclusion. The second syllogism is نحن ندرك وجود الأشياء إدراكا بديهيا. الوجود جزء من وجود الأشياء. وجود الأشياء مركب وجود وأشياء. إذن نحن ندرك الوجود إدراكا بديهيا. And we got to our statement or something close to it. Does that make sense? So let's now examine this further. Let's examine the first syllogism. نحن ندرك أشياء. We perceive things. وكل من أدرك شيئا, whoever perceives a thing, necessarily لا بد أن يدرك وجوده, necessarily ascertains its existence. All right. So then you're going to ask me, you bombarding us with all these words, what does it mean? What are we talking about here? The first thing we have to do is, the first thing we have to do is determine الإطار المفاهيمي, تنقيح المفاهيم. We want to define each and every word, understand each and every word, and see what we mean by it. So we're going to ask some questions. We're going to ask two sets of questions. Each is 4 questions. And we'll attempt to answer at least 6 of them, or 5 of them. So the first question we want to ask is, what is idrak? What do we mean by perception? What do we mean by apprehension? What do we mean by idrak? And remember, we are in the paradigm of Iji, Taftazani, Ibn Sina, Hikmah Masha'iyah. We're not in the paradigm of the transcendentals like Al-Hikmatul Muta'aliyah. We're not in their paradigm. We're not in the paradigm of materialistic philosophy, because idrak to them is nothing but cells, chemical reaction. That's what is idrak. So modern philosophies may have their own ways of looking at idrak. If we say that man is nothing but cells, and as some people say, we're nothing but stardust. We're just a configuration of the dusts that resulted from the Big Bang. And we don't have a soul, we don't have anything, we're just matters. But the way we grow is not modular. It's not like when my arm gets longer, it's not a Lego. I add another piece to my arm. My cells go, it takes on transformation each and every second. And we can easily refute this, the idrak as further understanding. But maybe we'll leave that for the exercise or for discussion or for the application session, or maybe at the end of the session. That's the first question. What do we mean by idrak? in their paradigm. That's it. That's the paradigm we're starting from. Number two, because idrak was also discussed pre-Aristotle. And before Aristotle, before Plato and Socrates, there were some crazy ideas about idrak. Crazy ways of thinking about idrak. And those that are interested can look them up. Aristotle was a bit more sane. He's more balanced than many of the Greek philosophers before him. ما المراد بالإدراك? That's question number one. Number two, ما نوع الإدراك الأول? The one in black. The إدراك highlighted in black. ندرك وأدرك. This is the first إدراك. نحن ندرك شيئا. What type of إدراك are we talking about when we say نحن ندرك شيئا? Then ما نوع الإدراك الثاني? What type of إدراك that we highlighted in red? Is it the same or is it different إدراك? And question number 4, ما المراد بلا بد? This اللابدية. When we say لا بد, ما المراد بلا بد? لا بد i.e. must. This mustness. This necessarily. What do we mean by that? كل من أدرك شيئا, whoever perceives a thing, necessarily لا بد أن يدرك وجوده. Necessarily perceives or ascertains its existence. Does that make sense? Those are, I think, legitimate questions. That's the first set of questions we want to ask. Well, first is, what is إدراك? What is إدراك? And we want المعنى العام, because we're not looking actually at the معنى of إدراك here. We're more interested in the type of إدراك, نوع الإدراك. So المعنى, you can come up with many definitions for إدراك. حصول صورة الشيء في العقل, any definition you may come up with. Or we can come up with a definition that encompasses all of that. And it's a broad definition. And we're going to think of إدراك as something like this. وصول المعنى إلى النفس. وصول المعنى, there is a meaning somewhere. This meaning could be a surah, could be anything. There is a meaning, there is a معنى. And this معنى reaches the soul, إلى النفس. And the soul has faculties. وصول المعنى إلى النفس. هذا هو الإدراك. Or I can switch it. I can say وصول النفس إلى المعنى. That my soul reaches the معنى. If there is an active component on my part. So there's a meaning somewhere, and I'm able to reach it. That's called إدراك. Imam Razi added the word بتمامه, i.e. وصول المعنى إلى النفس بتمامه, in its entirety. In its entirety. Now, from this broad meaning, you can apply it to any definition you've read before in any book. You can do a mapping. وصول المعنى إلى النفس, وصول النفس إلى المعنى بتمامه يسمى إدراكا. So if the معنى was to reach the nafs, not بتمامه, we call it شعور. We don't call it إدراك. شعور is a stage before إدراك, i.e. there is some awareness of what's going on, but I haven't fully grasped it yet. if you grasp معنى, if you grasp something, even if it's wrong, you think you grasp it in its entirety, this is called idrak. And if you haven't grasped it yet, this is called shu'ur. It's like you see when people go on TV and they have interviews. It's at the level of shu'ur. Everyone, I feel like this, or I think it's like this, or I think it's like that. They're not even at the level of idrak yet. Most of their conversation is not idrak. And from mana, you can draw a chart that gets you to the basic awaliyat, the 6 awaliyat, الفطريات والمشاهدات والمتواترات والمجربات إلى آخره. And I'll show you how I did the chart, which is not complete, but I just show you how it can be done. Let me see. Okay. So المعنى, we can say إما موجود or مفقود. The معنى is either existence or non-existence. The existence is either at the level of إدراك, إذا وصل بتمامه, or not بتمامه is called شعور. And the إدراك we can divide it further into تقليد, علم, جهل مركب, شك, ظن, and وهم. And the علم we can go into whether it's مفرد or مركب and combine حس and عقل, and we get to المشاهدات والبديهيات والفطريات الأوليات والتجريبيات والحدسيات والمتواترات. So any معنى that we see, we can trace it back to the 7 first principles through a process. And once the chart is complete, I think it will be, might be beneficial. So basically, this is the معنى. المعنى, and then we go into the awaliyat and we get to the 7 awaliyat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 awaliyat, and also includes the nazari. Includes the nazari. Even the nazariyat can be, the معنى we can trace it either to burhaniyat or nazariyat, qat'iyat or nazariyat.
Sheikh,
So
there's
that's not our focus now. Let's focus on.
excuse me, I'm sorry, Sheikh.
Now I'm seeing.
There's just a couple of questions. Could I bring them up here, or should I wait until afterwards?
Yeah, let's finish the set of questions first, and
Okay.
then we'll see if the questions on. Okay, the second question. نحن ندرك شيئا وكل من أدرك شيئا لا بد أن يدرك وجوده. The first إدراك. What kind of إدراك is it? Any guesses? Except for Marwan and Justin. Not the meaning of إدراك, but the type of إدراك. Any thoughts? تفضلوا سيدي.
إدراك by senses, Sheikh.
What's that?
By senses.
By senses, exactly. The first إدراك in the peripatetic paradigm is a حسي إدراك. The first إدراك. نحن ندرك أشياء. If I am in the outside, if I am in the real world, and in front of me there's a screen, I perceive the screen. I perceive it. الإدراك الأول هو الإدراك الحسي. كيف نعرفه؟ هو اطلاع الحيوان على الأمور الخارجية بواسطة الحواس. So extramental realities are, I become aware of them, and I see them, and I observe them, and I perceive them using my senses. So the first idrak is a sense perception. The type of إدراك is through the senses, i.e. آلة الإدراك is الحس. The tool of إدراك is our senses. So this, of course, assume three things. Assume there is a مدرك, and there is a مدرك, and there is a medium. So there is an extramental reality. There is someone who has علم and شعور, like me, and the faculty are sound, i.e. my sight is sound, my hearing is sound, my senses are sound, and the medium is conducive, i.e. the object is illuminated, we're not in darkness, there is nothing standing between me and the object. And we'll examine this proposition or these three things later on, because if we understand this simple proposition, it can also help us understand many philosophies today who negate one or the other, or compromises one or marginalize one at the expense of the other. That's the first idrak. How about the second idrak?
Sayyidi, just a question. The idrak al-awwal, does it exclude idrak of oneself?
No, because myself is the shay. Myself is amrun kharijiyun. It's a thing. It's an extramental reality. So what we did here, actually, instead of using نحن أدرك نفسي, because sometimes it can be confusing. People say, well, أنا أدرك نفسي بالوجدان, أدرك نفسي. It doesn't matter. Let's generalize it into أشياء, anything, whether it's your nafs or something else. نحن ندرك أشياء, including myself, including other things. So let's assume Sidi Harun has his camera off. And I say, where is Sidi Harun? Where is Sidi Harun? And then once he turns his camera on, I see him. I no longer ask that question, because أنا أدركته. The second idrak, what type of idrak is the second one? Is it the sense perception? Is it something else?
Kind of ma'nawi, conceptual, or universal.
Yeah, close. Not exactly what we're looking for. Yeah, that's good.
Maybe it's a hawas al-batina, or it's the intellect, depending. I mean, those are my two thoughts, depending on the school.
Yeah, Sidi Harun got it. It's the intellect. It's idrakun aqliyun. It's a rational cognition, i.e. اطلاع الحيوان على بعد غير حسي بواسطة العقل. So when I see a screen in front of me, I see something tangible, something concrete with my senses. And as I look at it, I perceive a dimension which is not tangible, which is its existence. That this thing actually is actual, is an entity, has been realized. I realize its realization. And this aspect is not subject to the senses. The senses do not see this object, this aspect. They only see the entity itself. فنحن ندرك أشياء وكل من أدرك شيئا, يعني if I find myself in front of something, I perceive that thing through my senses, and this type of perception is a sense perception. And at the same time, I perceive something which is not sensible, which is not, it's another dimension, it's another aspect that my sense perception did not detect and cannot see. My intellect can see it. And my intellect concludes that this actually exists. There is something out there. There's something called the screen. There's something called Harun. There's something called the camera. There's something called the wall. Now, let me ask you a question. How do we know? Why did we say, how do we know that the second idrak is not hissi? How can we verify that the second idrak is not hissi? Simple test.
Is it because it's universal? It can apply to anything that you see?
But why is it not hissi? Because it's universal. How do we know it's universal? I only see one entity. I'm seeing wujud muqayyad at this time. Huh? I've realized that there is wujud khas, the wujud of the screen in front of me. Yeah, it's not universal at this stage. And according to my sense perception, it's not, I'm looking at a particular. But how can we verify that the second idrak is not a sense perception? Sidi Zacchaeus, you want to try? Did I pronounce your name correctly?
Yeah. Yes.
Tafadhal.
Maybe when the object if it disappear from our eyes, yeah, and we can maybe have a memory, something like that.
Exactly. If it is subject to sense perception, when I see a screen, when I close my eyes, I have surah hissiya or surah khayaliya. I have a hissi image in my eye. If I look at Sidi Harun, then I close my eyes, I can picture Sidi Harun. And I can imagine him. However, can you picture an image for wujud? A hissi image. It doesn't have hissi image. It bypasses actually as-suratul hissiyya and bypasses my imagination and goes straight into the intellect. The intellect is the one that can perceive it, not the senses. Had the senses being able to perceive it, then we would have a sensi image, a mental image of that sense perception. So now we go to the next one. What does labudiyya mean? This necessarily. Labudiyya means badaha. When we say necessarily, i.e., it's self-evident. It's self-evident, necessarily self-evident. Now the question is, why is it self-evident? Or ما منشأ البداهة? What's the origin of this self-evidence? Where does it come from? This actually was a question, was a part of the activity, but we postponed it until today. What do you think is منشأ البداهة? Is it repetition? Is it manifestation? Is it idrak? Is it shuhud? Is it necessity? Is it by way of repetition because, you know, I became more familiar with the concept, it became badihi to me? Now, shuhud in French, they use the word intuition. So the poet here is witnessing, maybe there could be a better word for it. So منشأ البداهة is either الظهور أو الشهود. ظهور is either number 2 or number 4. ظهور, i.e., the object. Shuhud, i.e., me. Shuhud is in reference to me. ظهور is in reference to the object. So there is badaha. Why? Because the object is ظاهر لي. The object is manifesting itself to me. Because we have a rule that we establish. I mean, it's an obvious rule that الوجود من طبيعته أنه يعقل. Existence is intelligible or intelligible. يعقل. Why? Because ظاهر لي. Wujud is manifesting itself. This screen is manifesting itself to me. It's not hiding from me. It's not concealing itself from me. So ظاهرة لي. And shuhud, i.e., if I'm looking from, it's in reference to me. I am witnessing this object. I'm observing this object. I find myself in front of it. And if my jihaz idraki, if my idraki faculties are sound, I perceive it. فأنا أشهدها وهي ظاهرة لي. Okay, let's go to the second set of questions. How do I transition from the first type of idrak to the second type of idrak? يعني كيف انتقلت من الإدراك الأولي إلى الإدراك الثاني? We're not going to answer this question today. Secondly, what type of aql are we using here? When I said this is idrakun aqliyun, which aql? What do you mean by intellect? It's a rational cognition. What do you mean by that? What kind of aql am I using? What kind of aql was able to perceive this thing and ascertain it? Thirdly, what are the properties and characteristics of mafahim? What are the properties, characteristics of concepts and notions? We're not going to answer this at this time. But those are questions that we need to ask. Fourthly, ما مدلول هذه القضية أنا موجود. I exist. So let's focus on the second question. ما العقل المستعمل هنا? Any thoughts? Any ideas? Any attempts? You can say anything you want, anything that comes to your mind. We can make all the mistakes here, as long as we don't make them outside. Which aql are we using here?
I'm happy to make mistakes to keep the conversation going.
Okay, should I
What kind of
give you a
aqls
hint?
are there? What are the choices?
What are the choices? Okay, طيب, let me give you a hint. هل هو العقل الاستدلالي؟ Because aql has
No,
we can look at aql in terms of functions. What is the aql doing? The aql sometimes, you know, one of its function is to organize things. So this is aql tanzimi. Sometimes the aql does istidlal. So that's the role it's playing now, is عقل استدلالي. What kind of عقل are we using here? What function in the عقل are we using?
Possessive intellect, Sheikh.
نعم سيدي.
Possessive intellect.
Sorry.
Al-aqal al-malaka. Malaka bil
No,
malaka.
that's not what we're after, because that's a different division. العقل والملكة and العقل الغريزي. أيوة. It's a different division. Here we're looking at the role.
We say
what
that
role-
it's
نعم سيدي.
would we say that it's الحس الباطني or الشعور
Yeah, but
وجداني؟
what's that?
شعور وجداني.
Okay, it's close. Yeah, it's close.
Would we say it's العقل الكلي?
العقل الكلي. How do you define العقل الكلي?
Not the subjective عقل of any individual.
All right, okay.
العقل
So what role does it play? What role is it playing, this عقل الكلي that you're referring to?
I'm not sure.
All right. This عقل actually is not the عقل استدلالي. When do we use عقل استدلالي? Sidi Sharif?
When something's not immediate to us or self-evident, but here it seems that our intellectual perception that the thing is existent is immediate. It impresses itself upon us with no
Okay,
wasita,
good.
and we're not arriving at it through.
العقل الاستدلالي, as Sidi
Influence.
Sharif alluded to, يستعمل في logical reality. العقل الاستدلالي means I have قضايا, I have propositions. If I have propositions, أنا in عالم المفاهيم, in عالم القضايا. عالم القضايا is here in the mind. زيد قائم is in the mind. Outside, I only have Zaid, and he just happened to be sitting. Sitting is just an aspect of Zaid. العقل الاستدلالي, automatically you're talking, is in the mind. It's a logical reality. You are in the realm of propositions. But I'm not here in the realm of propositions. I'm not doing istidlal. The object is manifesting itself to me. I'm not even thinking about it. I'm not proving it. I'm not making an argument. It's not عقل استدلالي. It is what we call عقل شهودي. أنا أشهده. I'm observing it. I realize it. I perceive it. I ascertain it. It's not استدلالي at all, because there is no قضية in the first place. Because I'm not in my mind. I'm not here. I'm outside. So that's the thing. We have to be very careful and very alert not to mix the logical reality with the ontological reality, even though we may think it's obvious. The top-notch scholars may fall into this. And يحصل خلط بين المفهوم والمصداق, as they say, by applying a set of rules that apply to one unto the others. But that's a symptom. The root disease is somewhere else. That's what needs to be treated, not the symptoms. So what is the عقل المستعمل here is not عقل استدلالي. We're not in the realm of قضايا. We're in the realm of I'm in the real world. أنا في متن الواقع. I'm not in my mind. The second type of إدراك is عقل يدركه العقل الشهودي. is إدراك عقلي, لكن العقل وظيفته هنا هو الشهود, لا الاستدلال.
Could we conceive of this as as this operation of the mind as being istinbati, or as being a kind of hads as well, or no?
But there is no istinbat here, because حدث there is قضايا. حدث قضايا, but you don't go through a syllogism. You jump from one premise to the conclusion. You bypass the syllogism, you bypass the second premise, and you go straight to the conclusion. And as soon as they start writing the problem in front of you, you know the answer. You don't even have to do istidlal. It's a very quick istidlal. You're still in the istidlali aql. But your aql is so sharp and so refined that it can move from premises to conclusions in a microsecond. Was that what you meant, or? No, this is aql shuhudi. I'm not doing any istidlal at all. My aql istidlali is sleeping. My aql istidlali is not organizing, it's not doing istidlal, it's not reasoning. We're not reasoning, we're just the object is zahir only, manifesting itself to me, and I am witnessing it. أنا في متن الواقع. I am in reality itself, not inside the object, but i.e. من حيث الإدراك. من حيث الإدراك, I am in the object. I can see the object, I can observe it, but I'm not making any istidlal.
Is there room for a broader definition of hads, like knowing, like the example that's popularly used to know that the light of the moon is from the light of the sun, is from the light of the sun? And there's no qadaya, but it's often used to describe the kind of hads.
Yeah, but it's not aql shuhudi, huh? Because you only see the moon. If you want to now deduce that the moon receives its light from the sun, you have to do either istidlal or you have to do hadith. If you're like Imam Ghazali, he was very strong in hadsiyat. Just give him a part of the problem. We don't giving him a full information, because you see, in our mind, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us a GPS in our mind. So sometimes even with incomplete information, we can still reach our destination. For some people that train themselves to be like this, or Allah, it could be a gift as well. موهبة تنمى, or something that can be acquired. Their GPS is so strong, they can give them incomplete information, they still can make the decision and reach the proper conclusion.
Is it similar with communist senses or hiss al-mushtarak?
No, it's not. The hiss al-mushtarak does synchronization. Because I see something, I hear something, I touch something. Al-hiss al-mushtarak processes all this and synchronize it to be happening at the same time. So there is no time lag in between seeing or hearing. The hiss mushtarak has different function. So let's go back. كل من أدرك شيئا لا بد أن يدرك وجوده. Whoever perceives a thing, this is sense perception, necessarily, i.e., it's evident that ascertains its existence. In what realm? In the ontological realm. As soon as I put it in writing, I'm no longer in the ontological realm. I'm now in my head. Because there is writing, I think about the writing, I understand the writing. So when Imam Iji presented an argument by Razi, Imam Razi, what he's doing, he's mapping the ontological reality onto a logical reality. When we say wujud is badihi, we're talking about the ontological reality. Ontologically is badihi. Why? Because I perceive it and the object has manifested itself to me. Now I want to express this. When I want to express this, I'm no longer in the ontological reality. I'm now in the logical reality. I'm now in my mind. And I'm in my mind, someone may say, well, then you have to prove it. Why do you put this word beside this word and so on and so forth? If what we're writing is reflecting the ontological reality, then the mapping is easier. So if we were to expand on this, نحن ندرك أشياء بواسطة الحس، وهذا الإدراك هو إدراك حسي، وكل من أدرك شيئا بواسطة الحس أدرك بواسطة العقل وجوده إدراكا ضروريا. That's the meaning now of the first syllogism, the minor premise and the major premise. The type of idrak that is in black is a sense perception. The type of idrak in red is a rational perception or rational cognition. And the conclusion, نحن ندرك, i.e. rationally, ندرك إدراكا عقليا وجود الأشياء. And this وجود is بعد غير حسيا، إدراكا بديهيا. Why? Because وجود الأشياء بديهيا، وجود الشيء بديهيا. So we finished the first point. Any question on the first point? Does this make sense? Or
Sorry, can you
I think
just,
if we were to read the commentary of Sanandaji on Taftazani, he's assuming that we've gone through all these questions, and he starts discussing the second argument of Razi, and he will take us on a journey to understand the second tanbih of Razi. And had we read that, it might have distracted us from this discussion, this basic discussion, which I thought was necessary. I hope that you guys feel the same. Any comment, observation, question?
just a quick question. What was the wording of the natija again? I'm trying to copy it down. I missed it on the previous.
Natija, hold on a second. نحن ندرك وجود الأشياء إدراكا ضروريا.
Okay. جزاكم الله خيرا.
فنحن is the موضوع، ندرك the first إدراك is a محمول. So we bring the موضوع نحن, and we bring the second محمول and the major premise onto here. At the end, we're playing with words because we're trying to reflect, we're trying to map the ontological reality into words.
Doesn't it seem that the natija is wrapped into the mahmul of the major premise?
Which is إدراك وجوده.
We're saying that وكل من أدرك شيئا أدرك وجودا إدراكيا ضروريا. That there's a wujud, the connection, because we're at the end of the day we're establishing a connection between wujud and its daruriya nature or badaha nature of knowing. Isn't that wrapped into the predicate of the second premise of the major premise? Like, is it necessary to separate between the concept of wujud and the concept of the daruri nature of that idrak?
Can you elaborate on what you mean?
So at the end, the purpose of this istidlal was to establish how many syllogisms it would take and which syllogisms it would take to establish that wujud is badihi or badihi, as I think it was in the wording of al-Iji. And so in the major premise, so it seems that by the statement أدرك وجوده إدراكا ضروريا, it just seems that the natija, or what we're trying to really prove, is already in this is in that, wrapped in that premise. The connection between wujud and daruri, don't we have to separate between those two in order to say something about them that is new, or that establishes it? Maybe that's my question, is don't we have to separate between wujud and daruri in order to
We have said here la budda. We said la budda. Huh? Go here. كل من أدرك شيئا لا بد أن يدرك وجوده. لا بد أي necessarily بداهة ضرورة.
Okay, so this is resting on
This is a
our
rephrasing of this.
yes.
Instead of putting لا بد, I put ضروري or بديهي at the end.
Okay.
So لا بد, we explicitly stated لا بد as ضروري or بديهي. And منشأ الضرورة والبداهة is either from ظهور or شهود in the ontological reality.
Yes. Okay, so then it rests on our understanding, on our in the concept
Because of that
operation.
ظهور and شهود, in the mind now, I can call my إدراك ضروري as well. But my إدراك actually is pointing to that ضروري extramentally. So I'm just expressing it in words.
That's better.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
All right. And instead of ضروري, I could have used بديهي. It's the same thing. إدراكا ضروريا بديهيا, إدراكا بديهيا, إدراكا ضروريا. At this point, they're all conveying the same meaning. It's not istidlali. It's not based on nazar or istidlal, because I'm not in the realm of qadaya. I'm in the realm of the outside world. What time is it? Let me see. Are we? Oh, it's 10 o'clock. Oh. Apologies, we were only able to finish the first point. The second point is تعريف. والتعريف بمثل الكون والثبوت والتحقق والشيئية لفظي. So this is الوجود, تعريف الوجود. And we're going to jump here. Highlights. So we gave a brief recap of session 1. Before giving the highlights, CD Justin, can you give us a recap of what we discussed?
Inshallah, yeah. So what we just discussed right after the previous highlight, inshallah. So what we've seen is that there's a question of whether wujud itself is badihi or not. So we looked at how Imam Iji and Imam Razi approached the issue, and then we looked at 3 arguments of Imam Razi. So he provided 3 arguments to show that wujud is badihi. First was about his own existence, which we haven't touched on yet. Next was the ma'lums either exist or not, and then the final one was existence is acquired. So then we jumped to Imam Razi's first argument, which was the argument that Imam Iji also uses. And we assume the conclusion, we showed that there were 2 syllogisms needed in order to get to the conclusion that wujud is badihi. And then we spoke about the statement, kullu man adraka shay'an fala budda lahu an yudrika wujudahu. So we spoke about the 2 different types of idrak. So the first idrak is one that is through the senses, it's hissi. And then the second idrak is idrak aqli. So it's happening through the medium of the aql. And then we spoke about what la budda means, and how la budda means that it's self-sufficient, and it's either going to be through dhuhur or shuhud. And then we spoke about the difference between zuhur, shuhud, and then whether we're at the type of aql that we're using, whether that aql is istidlali, tanzimi, but when we're in this statement, we're at the aql, the shuhudi. So the aql is receiving the perception or the zuhur of the ashya. So as Sheikh Dalal said, that we're in metanul waqi, or we're in the real world and we're not in our minds. And then that was the summary, inshallah.
So just to end with highlights, we've gone over a brief recap of session 1. We looked at the knowable, the ma'lum, and we examined the first question: is existence self-evident? We didn't get to can existence be defined, but inshallah it will take us 15 minutes, 20 minutes to do that. The idea here is to instead of reading, is to give ourselves methodology of thinking when we read these books. What type of questions a statement can raise in our heads to make us understand the statement better and realize what framework we're in, not confuse frameworks or the set of principles of one framework onto another. Next session, we will look at can existence be defined, and we'll look at the اشتراك الوجود, and we'll look at زيادة الوجود على الماهية. And maybe we'll look at some questions that we've gone through in activity 1 and try to see if we can collectively answer them or provide some thoughts on them. Apologies for going over the time. It's 5 minutes past 10. So yeah, we'll stop here. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والله سبحانه وتعالى أعلم وأحكم وحسبنا ونعم الوكيل. Sidi Harun, want to say a few words?
Jazakallah khairan, Sheikh. Alhamdulillah, I mean, there's a few remaining questions in the chat on YouTube. I can forward those to you if you'd like, or if you want to
please
take them.
forward them, and then we'll see if we'll address some of them in the beginning of the session or at the end of the session next time, inshallah.
Okay. Jazakallah khair. And so I would just ask everyone just to keep an eye on your emails from Basira Education. That'll be the main way that you hear from us. Be careful. Sometimes these emails go to the spam folder. So if you haven't received an email, any emails from us, or from Basira, I should say, then just check your spam folders. But we'll keep in touch about that and about the upcoming review sessions.
All right, Sidi Harun sent, I think, an exit questions. I think those questions would help us in our sessions and tailoring or modifying our sessions.
Yeah, that was for last session, and I think what we'll do is we'll just send it separately for this session. As we'll send an email with exit questions for each session, so we can keep them separated. Yeah, so the exit questions, just the follow-up questions, you should have received an email about that, I think somewhere in the last couple of days regarding last week's session. And we'll send another one for this week's session, just to get your feedback on what kind of remaining questions you have. We'll send those out to everybody, inshallah.
There are a few elephants in the room, and I prepared a couple of slides on 2 elephants. No one has asked about them yet, but I'm expecting that some of you will ask about it. And some of the elephants we don't have to address at this time, but 2 of them we may need to address during the 6 sessions. So I'm hoping that some of you will notice the elephants and ask about them, inshallah.
Jazakumullahu khairan.
جزاكم الله خير.
جزاكم الله خير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
عليكم السلام.
Um,
Yeah, sure. Jazakumullah.
Let me see here.